John 10, there's a verse where Jesus uses a figure of speech, but the Pharisees did not understand what he was telling them. It indicates that there is a misunderstanding that the Pharisees did not understand, but presumably John the disciple did understand. I don't think that the figure of speech here is explained. In fact, how much text are we looking at that he says that the figure of speech is used in? How much text must we look at to guess at what the figure of speech actually is? Now, Jesus used a lot of parables in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, but is that the same thing as a figure of speech? I think of a figure of speech as something that might be in common usage for a particular culture at a certain time, but is likely to go away and not make sense in other languages. Whereas a parable, I think, is usually a story that demonstrates an idea that will have the same meaning regardless of the language. So here, when Jesus used a figure of speech, does it mean that Jesus used a pun? That is a word that sounds the same in Hebrew as another word, but doesn't mean the same thing elsewhere? Or does it mean he used a word which has become seeped in symbolism? Now, if the figure of speech were some kind of pun, then I suspect that Googling this would reveal what Hebrew word was a pun. The words here that I can see with the potential for becoming figures of speech because of their symbolism are gate, gatekeeper, sheep, and stranger. There may be others. Voice, follow, shepherd, thief, robber. But Jesus really comes right out and says it in John 10:7. Very truly, I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. Why is it that I grumble and doubt when he says this? Well, because gate is already seeped in symbolism. In Deuteronomy 20, for instance, it says, when you march up to attack a city, make its people an offer of peace. If they accept and open their gates, all the people in it shall be subject to forced labor and shall work for you. And that's the good news. If they refuse to make peace and they engage you in battle, lay siege to that city. When the Lord your God delivers it into your hand, put the sword to all the men in it. So on the bad side, if they don't open their gates, you are to put a sword to all the men in the city. However, in the cities, in the cities of the nations the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance, do not leave alive anything that breathes. Completely destroy them. So if Jesus is the gate, and this is what the Jews have been told to anybody that doesn't let them in the gate, well, that's very bad news, because many Christians, as a rule, will not allow anyone in who does not accept Jesus as God. But the Jews have to want this badly enough to ask for it. They will never ask to be let into a gate that says, I am God, because they quite rightly don't believe that gates are gods. So what's this? You may cut down trees that you know are not fruit trees and use them to build siege works until the city at war with you falls. So here's the thing. If the tree bears good fruit, eat its fruit. But if the tree doesn't bear good fruit, then you can use it as a weapon. Okay, so this is one of the symbolic meanings of Jesus being a gate that the Pharisees might not have understood. Let's see if we can find another one. So another place where a gate has a prominent role is in Deuteronomy 22. In this verse, a gate is a place where the parents bring proof that their daughter was a virgin after her husband accuses her of not being a virgin on marriage. So is Jesus the gate you come to prove your daughter's virginity? I'm going to say most likely not. Then here in Deuteronomy 22:24, if a woman is pledged to be married to another man and a second man sleeps with her, the gate is the place where you stone to death both the woman and the man who slept with her. So let's say for a moment that Jesus is the firstborn son of God, and God decides to undertake to rebuild Jericho. If God has decided to rebuild Jericho, and Jesus is his firstborn son, then who is the youngest who sets up the gates? Another gate of great symbolic meaning is the gate at Bethlehem. Without getting into the context too much, I see that King David asked for water and said, "Oh, that someone would get me a drink of water from the well near the gate of Bethlehem." But then when he got the water, well, 3 mighty warriors broke through the Philistine lines, drew water from the well, and then but then David refused to drink it, probably because there was too much violence. "Far be it from me, Lord, to do this," he said. Is it not the blood of the men who went at the risk of their lives?" And David would not drink it. So again, symbolically, if Jesus is claiming to be the gate, it is a difficult figure of speech to accept. Here, King David can plainly see that the water is good for thirst, but he refuses to drink because of the gate. Because King David knows he does not deserve the water, if he must force his men to risk their lives so that he can have some. Now in 2 Samuel 18 through 19, there is more mention of King David standing by a gate. Now, while this story does not seem to put much symbolism in the gate itself, there is curious mention of David's son Absalom. Absalom happened to meet David's men. He was riding his mule, and as the mule went under the thick branches of a large oak, Absalom's hair got caught in the tree. He was left hanging in midair, while the mule he was riding kept on going. When one of the men saw what had happened, he told Joab, "I just saw Absalom hanging in an oak tree." "What, you saw him? Why didn't you strike him to the ground right there? Then I would have had to give you 10 shekels of silver and a warrior's belt." But the man replied, "Even if 1,000 shekels were weighed out into my hands, I would not lay a hand on the king's son. In our hearing the king commanded you and Abishai and Ittai protect the young man Absalom for my sake. And if I had put my life in jeopardy, and nothing is hidden from the king, you would have kept your distance from me." Joab said, "I'm not going to wait like this for you." So he took 3 javelins in his hand and plunged them into Absalom's heart, while Absalom was still alive in the oak tree. And 10 of Joab's armor-bearers surrounded Absalom, struck him, and killed him. So is there some parallel between the killing of Absalom and the son of King David and the killing of Jesus, the son of Joseph, son of God, son of man, what have you? The runner comes alone to report the news. They wonder at who the runner is and what news he brings. "Look, another man is running alone." King David, said he must be bringing good news too. The watchman says, "It seems to me that the first one runs like Ahimaaz, son of Zadok." "He's a good man," the king said. "He comes with good news." So how could a bad man come with good news, or a good man come with bad news? And he does come with good news. This is what he presents first. All is well. He bowed down before the king with his face to the ground and said, "Praise be to the Lord your God. He has delivered up those who have lifted their hands against my lord the king." Then the king asks, "Is the young man Absalom safe?" And now the bad news. Ahimaaz answered, "I saw great confusion just as Joab was about to send the king's servant and me, your servant, but I don't know what it was." The king said, "Stand aside and wait here." So he stepped aside and stood there. Now the bad news. Not quite yet. The Cushite arrived and said, "My lord the king, hear the good news. The Lord has vindicated you today by delivering you from the hand of all who rose up against you." And the king asked the Cushite, "Is the young man Absalom safe?" And the Cushite replied, May the enemies of the Lord and king who rise up to harm you be like that young man?" Oh, how very carefully couched and easily misinterpreted phrasing does the bad news come. The king was weeping and mourning for Absalom, and for the whole army the victory that day was turned into mourning, because on that day the troops heard, "King is grieving for his son." The men stole into the city that day as men steal in when they are ashamed, when they flee from battle. The king covered his face and cried aloud, O my son Absalom, O Absalom, my son, my son. So Joab told King David, Go out and encourage your men. I swear by the Lord, if you don't go out, not a man will be left with you by nightfall. This will be worse for you than all the calamities that have come on you from your youth till now. So the king got up and took his seat in the gateway, and when the men were told the king is sitting in the gateway, they all came before him. King David said, Ask the elders of Judah, why should you be the last to bring this king back to his palace? You are my relatives, my own flesh and blood. Why should you be the last to bring back the king? He said that to Zadok and Abiathar. But say to Amasa, Are you not my own flesh and blood? May God deal with me, be it ever so severely, if you are not the commander of my army for life in place of Joab. So I guess to understand exactly what this means, you would need to know who Amasa is, who Zadok and Abiathar are. But in any case, whatever this was said, he won over the hearts of the men of Judah so that they were all of one mind. But one thing is made clear here. He does not want Joab as the commander of his army anymore. Not when Joab took 3 javelins in his hand and plunged them into Absalom's heart while Absalom was still alive in the oak tree. In any case, if I'm trying to find symbolism, this gateway where King David takes the command away from the man who murdered his son seems a bit symbolic to me. That doesn't last very long, though. It doesn't last very long, as Joab murders Amasa shortly afterward. Amasa was not on guard against the dagger in Joab's hand, and Joab plunged it into his belly, and his intestines spilled out on the ground. Without being stabbed again, Amasa died. Then Joab and his brother Abishai pursued Sheba, son of Bichri, and one of Joab's men stood beside Amasa and said, Whoever favors Joab and whoever is for David, let him follow Joab. Amasa lay wallowing in his blood in the middle of the road, and the man saw that all the troops came to a halt there. When he realized that everyone who came up to Amasa stopped, he dragged him from the road into a field and threw a garment over him. After Amasa had been removed from the road, everyone went on with Joab to pursue Sheba, son of Bichri. So this Joab character, he's quite the murderer and the liar. Yet how problematic this becomes for King David. King David's oath only bothers Joab if Joab cared one whit for King David in the first place. Say to Amasa, Are you not my own flesh and blood? May God deal with me, be it ever so severely, if you are not the commander of my army for life in place of Joab. So Joab murders Amasa in cold blood. But was there an excuse? The king said to Amasa, Summon the men of Judah to come to me within 3 days, and be here yourself. But when Amasa went to summon Judah, he took longer than the time the king had set for him. So King David had put Amasa in charge for life, and Amasa was not doing a satisfactory job. Unfortunately, King David's words were either bad for Amasa or bad for King David. So unfortunately, King David's words were either bad for Amasa or bad for King David. For if Amasa had lived his life but did not lead, then David would be dealt with ever so severely. But if Amasa had led but did not live, or did lead but did not live, there's no such. If Amasa did lead but did not live, the oath he made before Amasa and God do not really apply. Joab took advantage in what he saw as a loophole in the king's words, for Amasa was the commander of David's army for life, just not a very long life. This is why when in John 8:46 Jesus says, "If I am telling the truth, why don't you believe me?" I try to answer that question literally. If King David said, "May God deal with me severely if Amasa does not command my armies for life," in place of Joab, and Joab goes and kills Amasa, oh, the letter of the law is met, yet the heart of the law is so very corrupted. Why do I not believe the murderer and the liar when he tells the truth? Isn't it obvious? Okay, I skipped one of the gates. Genesis 28:17 mentions a gate at Bethel where Joseph rested his head on a stone and dreamed of a stairway with the angels of God ascending and descending. There's somebody else that's noted the different the things here. Understanding the temple, Bethel, Bethlehem, and Bethesda appear to be different places. There's a sheep gate at Bethesda, and there's the gate that that God appeared and spoke to Jacob at Bethel at a gate. And then at Bethlehem, King David asked for the water from the well near the gate, but then he didn't drink it because it was too much. It was too much danger. This is kind of interesting because they're talking about different temples, but there's also at least one mention of a gate in each of these places. Another mention of the word gate is in Joshua 20, a gate to a city of refuge where if you accidentally kill someone, you go there and you stand at the entrance of the city gate and state your case before the elders of the city. Then the elders are to admit the fugitive into their city and provide a place to live among them. If the avenger of blood comes in pursuit, the elders must not surrender the fugitive because the fugitive killed their neighbor unintentionally and without malice aforethought. They are to stay in that city until they have stood trial before the assembly and until the death of the high priest who is serving at the time. Then they may go back to their own home in the town from which they fled. So these cities of refuge were Kedesh, Shechem, Hebron, Bezer, Ramoth, Bashan. They sound a little like what we would call prison, just prison for involuntary manslaughter cases. I think I'm going to become exhausted before I read all of the places where gates appear in the Bible. First Chronicles, and then coming down here, we've got all these gates. And then Second Chronicles. From Second Chronicles to Ezra. From Ezra to Nehemiah. From Nehemiah, what's after Nehemiah? Nehemiah to Esther. Nehemiah has a lot of gates in it. Nehemiah to Esther. I'm not even through Nehemiah. Now Esther has a lot of gates in it. Job has gates. Psalms have lots of gates. Oh, this might be good. The Lord loves the gates of Zion more than all the other dwellings of Jacob. But the Lord doesn't claim to be the gates. Is that... So what are we here? In Job, they have several references to the gates of death and the gates of deepest darkness. Job talks about the gates of death and the gates of deepest darkness, which prompts me to ask, what is the sheep gate to the sheep at Bethesda? It is not a terribly nice place to be for sheep, since that was where sheep were sacrificed for other people's sins. Here in Isaiah 14, we have Isaiah actually telling the gate to wail. And in Isaiah 3, we have the gates lamenting and mourning. destitute, sitting on the ground. Isaiah says, this prophecy came in the year King Ahaz died. Do not rejoice, all you Philistines, that the rod that struck you is broken. Do not rejoice that the rod that struck you is broken. From the root of that snake will spring up a viper. Its fruit will be a darting venomous serpent. The poorest of the poor will find pasture, and the needy will lie down in safety. But your root I will destroy by your famine. It will slay your survivors. Wail, you gate, howl, you city, melt away, all you Philistines. A cloud of smoke comes from the north, and there is not a straggler in its ranks. What answer shall be given to the envoys of that nation? The Lord has established Zion, and in her his afflicted people will find refuge. But the poorest of the poor will find pasture, and the needy will lie down in safety. And the gate will wail. In Isaiah 3 it says, instead of a fragrance there will be a stench, instead of a sash, a rope, instead of well-dressed hair, baldness, instead of fine clothing, sackcloth, instead of beauty, branding. Your men will fall by the sword, your warriors in battle. The gates of Zion will lament and mourn. Destitute, she will sit on the ground. In that day 7 women will take hold of one man and say, we will eat our own food and provide our own clothes. Only let us be called by your name. Take away our disgrace. In any case, this personification of the gates in Isaiah 3 is, well, Isaiah does it a couple of times, personifies the gates. Yet in Psalm 87, it says that the Lord loves the gates of Zion more than all of the other dwellings of Jacob. The Zion gate is one of the 8 gates in the walls of the old city of Jerusalem. But I'm not sure if the Zion gate is the same thing as the gates of Zion. Now, you may be asking yourself, why am I speculating randomly on the interpretation of the word gate? Well, I will freely acknowledge that I am on a wild goose chase. My point is that almost all of the possible interpretation for this figure of speech that Jesus uses are not pretty. But there are a couple of keys to this. What is a gate? It is something that gives people on the inside authority over the people outside. Presumably the people inside are safe and protected, and the people outside are not safe and protected. Yet you can still lay siege to a community behind a gate, and a gate prevents people from getting the water of Bethlehem. And try as I might, I cannot really feel any interpretation of this gate figure of speech that is really representative of the Messiah. Or is there? The trouble is, can you be both the gate and the shepherd? Sheep are appreciated for their wool and their meat, and, sarcastically, their wonderful forgiving properties when you sacrifice them. That's what happened to, not Absalom, by killing King David's son. King David's oath was forgiven. No, I'm sorry. Strike that. I'm getting the names Amasa and Absalom confused. I think for the rest of this chapter I'm going to look for parallels in the other Gospels. Trying to search for meaning through the whole of the Old Testament is difficult and leads to confusion, but comparing Christ's words in Matthew, Mark, and Luke to Christ's words in John is usually more simple. Words such as scatter and stranger and shepherd. Matthew discusses the scattering of the seed. He does say, whoever does not with me is against me, and whoever does not gather with me scatters. But is that really saying that those that are scattered are bad for not being with him? Because you scattering the seed, harvesting and gathering where you have not scattered seed, and there is here in Matthew 26 it says, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. That directly kind of opposes what it says in John 10:12. The hired hand is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep, so when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. Mark 14:27 says, "You will all fall away, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered." As for John 10:17, there's a significant difference. He seems to be saying that the hired hand, let's see, where's the hired hand? The hired hand is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away, and the wolf attacks the sheep and scatters it. The man runs away because he is a hired hand and can do nothing for the sheep. He seems to be saying that the hired hand does not care for the sheep because he is afraid of the wolf. And then he goes on to say, I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me, just the Father knows me, and I know the Father. And I laid down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that are not of this sheep pen. I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd. The reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life only to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and the authority to take it up again. This command I received from my Father. So the other Gospels say that the shepherd will be struck down and the flock will scatter, and in general scattering is good. But John's Gospel says that the shepherd cannot be struck down and the flock will never scatter. Now for the word stranger. It appears that the word stranger does not appear in Mark or Luke, but it does appear in Matthew. This is a fairly important parable, I think. The king said to the people on his right, Come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you as a sick or in prison and go to visit you? The king will reply, Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. Then he will say to those on his left, Depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire, prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not invite me in. I needed clothes, and you did not clothe me. I was sick and in prison, and you did not look after me. They also will answer, Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty, or a stranger, needing clothes, or sick in prison, and did not help you? He will reply, Truly I tell you, whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me. Then they will go away to eternal punishment, but the righteous to eternal life. So it is this that I want to directly compare to what Jesus is apparently telling the Pharisees. When he has brought out all his own, he goes on ahead of him, and his sheep will follow him because they know his voice. But they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they do not recognize a stranger's voice. Jesus used this figure of speech, but the Pharisees did not understand what he was telling them. And I think it would be much easier to make the case that the figure of speech that Jesus was giving right here was the figure of speech about the stranger. Because Jesus is not the gate, he's the stranger. But then when he says, my sheep listen to my voice, I know them, and they follow me. I give them eternal life, and they shall never perish. No one will snatch them out of my hand. Is this Father of his who asks people never to listen to strangers, to run away from strangers? Is this the Father? Is there no way to snatch you out of that Father's hand? Because yes, gives them eternal life, great. But what kind of eternal life? The people that run away from strangers, are they those who did not do for the least of these, or are they those that go to eternal life? So the parable of the sheep and the goats in Matthew 25 offers eternal punishment for those who never help a stranger. While John offers eternal life to those who will never even recognize the voice of a stranger. Who is the voice of the stranger that they should recognize? Of course, in the voice of the stranger is the voice of the Son of Man. Jesus said, "You have seen him. He is the one speaking with you." He also said, the king replied, "Whatever you have done for the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me."